90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we have an immigration law update, and our special guest is Tina Genovese, and she's an attorney with offices in Rockville Center, and she's going to bring us up to date on where some of the immigration laws stand now and what's likely to happen in the future, and what are the best practices for people seeking immigration or citizenship documents. Tina, welcome to Law You Should Know. I know you help immigrants to become legal and obtain legal documentation so they can remain and work legally in this country. What are some of the basic ways you help people do that?
There are many different ways somebody can get documentation here in the United States. It could be somebody that came on a tourist visa and overstayed, and now they're going to look for help in order to be able to remain here. It could also be somebody that is, fleeing their country because they're afraid of being harmed in their country.
And that might be asylum.
That would be asylum, right? Exactly.
And sometimes people come here as a student and, again, they may, for a variety of reasons, may overstay their visa.
Yes, that
but
happens
they
as well.
legally entered the country. And I guess there are people who did not legally enter the country, and you try to help those people as well.
Yes, both scenarios happen. I think when people think of immigration, they automatically think of what's going on at the border, but that's not the only type of immigration that our country sees.
And in terms of asylum, what might be some of the grounds for asylum that someone can request asylum?
So the grounds are actually stated in the law, so it can't be any type of harm that a person is afraid of or has experienced in the past. It has to be based on these specific grounds. So it would be political opinion, race, religion, nationality, or a particular social group.
But are they being picked on because of those things?
Yes, exactly.
And what does picked on mean? A gun put to their head, they're discriminated against, they're in fear of their lives?
Discrimination typically isn't a ground for asylum, but how the extent of the harm can vary based on an individual's circumstances. So it could be all of the above. It could be somebody putting a gun to your head. It could be
some kind of ground-based fear.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You also help people who are here try to become legal residents. So what are some of the ways that you try to do that? So
it could be a relative, which would be a very straightforward case. Would be a relative sponsoring their parent, spouse, or child, whether it be it could also be a fiance.
Are there long lines and big waiting periods for anyone other than a spouse to actually come to the country?
There can be. So it doesn't necessarily have to be only a spouse. A spouse and a parent and a child are all immediate relatives. So their wait would be a little bit shorter than, say, a sibling.
And it may depend on the country they're coming from, whether it's Asia or South America or Europe. Right.
There are some countries that have a much longer wait than others.
And usually have to wait there.
Typically, yes.
But if you're already in this country, you can help them at least get online or get the paperwork in order.
If they're here and the person that they want to sponsor is also here, they can do everything here.
And can they remain here until their name comes up?
Yes. So while the paperwork is pending, they can remain here in the United States with their loved one.
And so there might be special considerations if they have an employer, let's say in certain industries, if they have relatives, as you've mentioned, or maybe they have some unique occupation, or they're starting their own business. All those might lead to some kind of special consideration.
Yes, so there is a process in the law under immigration for employers that are looking to sponsor employees. They can bring foreign workers from overseas to work here temporarily for their business. And then there are also, like you mentioned, sponsorships if someone wants to come here and open a business or invest in a business, which creates jobs for Americans.
And that could even be buying real estate or something of a certain amount?
It could be if they're investing in a business that is doing the real estate, yes.
Anything that you want to add about some of those grounds before we go on to refugees?
Well, just that April 1st is the filing deadline for if you want to bring somebody here from overseas to work temporarily. It's under what's called the H-1B visa category. And there's so much demand for this type of visa that they impose a lottery system. And in order to participate, applicants have to put themselves into that lottery by the April 1st deadline.
So even if you're a medical professional or a nurse, you have to go into that lottery?
Not everybody. It depends on what your occupation is and what type of visa you're seeking to come here.
Are there some occupations where it's easier to get that visa or some that are easier than others? You know, if you're a unique French chef, does that help you? Or is there a small line for that than if you're, you're going to work at McDonald's?
Yeah, so there definitely is. The more qualified you are and the higher degrees that you have definitely put you in a different category in regards to what you're applying for.
But someone has to sponsor you. A potential employer has to get that visa for you.
There has to be a job offer.
It's not something you can apply for. Okay.
Right.
For all those things you mentioned, does it have to be a job offer?
Yes.
Are there other grounds that someone could try to apply, for a visa to come into the country?
Well, if for people that are already here, there's also what's called a U visa, which is for victims of crimes. So people that have been a victim of a crime here in the United States, they can also apply for relief.
And what kind of crimes might help open that door?
So it is limited to specific crimes. If you've been a victim of robbery, murder, kidnapping, extortion, just to name a few, there's a long list. And even if the crime isn't on the list, an attorney can help you make the argument that the crime that you suffered from is very similar to the ones that are on the list.
And this is the crime in your home country?
This is a crime that was committed against you here in the United States.
Oh, in the United States. So
right.
If you're here illegally, but you become a crime victim, that may change the circumstances.
Right. So if you're here and you're undocumented, irrespective of how you got here, the government wants you to come forward and report these crimes. So it's a way to incentivize the undocumented community to work with police and law enforcement to prosecute against criminals.
And if someone victimized you, if they said you're a healthcare worker, we're going to get you a job, but they stole your money, if they said they were a lawyer, you're a real immigration lawyer, but if they were a notario and that's not an immigration lawyer, but the people thought they were and gave them their money and nothing happened, that might make them a crime victim.
Unfortunately, no.
Or not, okay.
Yeah, unfortunately. So if you're a victim of a notario who, as you mentioned, is not an immigration attorney, but often people from Central and South America will think that they are because in their home countries, they are trusted advocates.
But if someone said they were going to get you a nursing job or some kind of job and they got you to the country and the job never materialized and you were a victim of a fraud,
right,
that might qualify you?
If you go a step further, so if that person, let's say that person came here in that scenario to work, and they worked, and then, and then they were not given pay, that might qualify you for a different type of visa because that might fall into the category of labor trafficking.
So if you worked at any job, even a lawyer, and you weren't paid, you might be a victim of labor trafficking?
I mean, yeah, but for people that are here undocumented.
No, but it's people should be aware of this stuff. It almost might be a silver lining to the victimization. So because they were a victim, they may have some rights.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
you can help them take advantage of them.
Absolutely, right.
Are there other situations where they can have an employer here can hire overseas workers temporarily to, for their business or industry?
Yeah, so that goes back to what we were talking about, the H-1B visa. That is the purpose of that visa. is to bring people, to bring people to the United States to fill the gap in our labor force.
And these are sometimes professionals, so they might be computer programmers, scientists, medical doctors.
Yes, absolutely. They are, not sometimes, they are professionals. So the minimum requirement to bring somebody here on an H-1B visa is that they have a bachelor's degree or its equivalent.
And do they need a particular major or skill? Let's say like nursing or engineering, or is liberal arts going to be enough?
It doesn't have to be a particular skill, no.
But there has to be a job for them here.
Correct.
So if an immigrant with that in mind, they need that advanced education abroad.
Correct.
Or even here, they need that education, and that might qualify for them for some kind of job.
Yes.
Does the employer also have to make a showing that Americans are not available?
Exactly. So the employer must show that they've done recruitment and that they weren't able to find any U.S. citizens that were qualified for the job.
And that's why we see all those specifically worded ads in the New York Times, so they can show they advertised and no one saw their ad.
Yes, but the ad can't be very tailored to the exact position. Like, you can't write an ad that excludes most people purposely because you have somebody in mind. So it's really important in those scenarios to have the help of an attorney who can help you draft a posting that does not exclude most of the population, but also helps you get to what you need.
Okay. But if it's a chef who must be fluent in foreign language, they have a particular person in mind, or a certain unique qualifications in mind.
Yes. Certain unique qualifications, yes.
Anything else that you want to say about the April 1st deadline? You can help employers or workers try to take advantage of that deadline. Yeah,
so now, in the beginning of the year is the time to reach out to an attorney. And, my office can definitely help with the lottery process. And then once your employee is chosen in the lottery, we can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is recruitment and testing the workforce to make sure that there are no U.S. citizens able to take the job. Okay.
And just to remind our listeners, we're talking with attorney Tina Genovese, and she has offices in Rockville Center. And as you've heard, she works with businesses and also with people who are looking for immigration, status and documentation. And you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. And if you missed any portion of the program or you'd like to tell someone else about it, just go to the website, nccradio.org, to listen to the podcast. And so this would result in H-1B visa if you help someone, get that visa, or an employer get those visas?
Yes, and that would be good for 6 years. The person would be able to work in the United States for 6 years, 2 3-year increments. After 3 years, they'll need to reapply. And then after that time, they can also be sponsored to remain in the U.S. permanently.
Now, I've heard because of layoffs going on by some big companies, some people who came here with this visa, their visa may be in jeopardy if they no longer have a job. What can they do in that situation? Find another employer?
Yeah, so that is definitely a concern right now. So those employees, like you said, either need to find another employer, they need to return to their country and then start the process over, or have a consultation with an immigration attorney to determine if there are some other grounds that will allow them to remain here.
And you help businesses, small and large, to recruit people for their jobs, foreigners if necessary. And you also help people to, qualify for some of these visas or to renew some of these visas and transition into the citizenship process if they can.
Yes, exactly. So, there are two different categories. So you can either be here as a resident, and that's legal, and you could remain here like that for the rest of your life if you choose. Or you could, of course, become a citizen, and my office also helps with that process.
And as a resident, are you able to bring family members here?
You are, but there's definitely benefits to doing it if you're a citizen.
And once you're a citizen, that can never be taken away from you. I mean, the laws may change down the road.
Right.
Even the immigration laws may change. So I think you mentioned earlier, right now, while Biden is still president, there's more of some of these doors are open or open a little bit, and they may close, in a year or two if the political winds in Washington changed and we haven't yet worked out an immigration reform. So before that happens or not, there's still some doors that are open in the next year or two.
Well, with any presidency, immigration reform is a hot topic, and it's trying to be worked on. And each president and their cabinet brings their own ideas to that. So anytime that there's an upcoming election, you want to think about, you want to reassess what's going on in the area and whether or not it would be a good time to do things before the election.
You've also worked with small businesses with a contract work platform, and how do you help people or small businesses with that?
Well, so when you think of the H-1B visa that we were just talking about, a lot of employers will hear this and think, oh, that's for big companies. Very large companies can hire overseas. But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, a lot of my clients, especially post-COVID, are businesses who during COVID started using platforms to hire people from overseas that stayed overseas and did work for the company. And now they want to bring those people here to the U.S. So it could be a small company that just wants to bring one or two people over. It doesn't have to be a very large organization.
Tell us about that process. You mentioned it earlier, but just very briefly again, how you help that business person to fill their need for one and two employees with certain skills.
So we make sure that the employee that they want to bring over has the required education, as I mentioned, the bachelor's degree or an equivalent. Because the education is done overseas, we want to make sure that it is the same standard as what we require here in the U.S. for a bachelor's. So we would get an education evaluation to make sure that it's the same, and enter that person into the lottery if they're going to meet those qualifications. And if they're picked, then we can go forward from there.
And they need a potential job to enter the lottery. They just can't enter the lottery because they'd like to.
Correct. They need a job offer, yes.
And you mentioned earlier, about some do's and don'ts about avoiding criminal convictions, especially if someone's undocumented. What are some other do's and don'ts for someone who would eventually like to immigrate to the United States, even whether they're here or not?
Right. So criminal convictions is definitely a big one. The U.S., of course, takes that very seriously. So not only avoiding being in a situation where you're going to be convicted of a criminal offense, of course, but also if you find yourself in that situation, to not only have a criminal defense attorney, which here in the U.S., of course, is offered at no cost, but also an immigration attorney, so that they can work together to determine the best possible situation for you in regard to your immigration consequences.
Because if you plead to certain lesser crimes, they may somehow make it harder for you to immigrate.
Correct. Exactly. Like, just for example, drug crimes are a very serious thing in immigration law. And even though marijuana has become legal in New York for recreational use, it is not legal federally. So somebody might think, oh, I can, possess marijuana because it's legal in my state now. But that will potentially make them not eligible for immigration benefits.
And what are some other crimes that we may not consider so major that can help disqualify someone from immigration benefits?
So drugs is a big one. Domestic violence obviously is not something that we take lightly, but there could be areas that are considered domestic violence that, maybe the case gets dismissed, maybe there's a misunderstanding, there's so much gray area there. But domestic violence is also taken very seriously when it comes to immigration law.
And if you mentioned earlier, if you've been a legitimate victim of domestic violence, that may help you.
Yes.
And what are some other do's and don'ts for someone who's trying to, qualify down the road for citizenship or just a better immigration status?
Another consideration could be taxes. So the U.S. government allows people who are undocumented to get what's called an ITIN number. it is similar to a Social Security number in that it allows a person to pay taxes. It doesn't give all the other benefits, of course, but it does allow you to pay taxes. And if you are somebody that has paid taxes for the work that you've been doing in the United States, it helps you in regard to your immigration petitions.
And is there a benefit? Do you sometimes need to prove you were in the United States, whether it's legal or illegally for a certain period of time? So paying taxes, that kind of help prove you were here?
Yes, exactly. There are certain categories of immigration relief where you need to prove presence. And like you said, if you've paid your taxes, that will prove your presence.
And sometimes there have been amnesty programs and you had to prove that you entered or were here before a certain date. So
yes,
you want to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Are there any other activities or things that's best to avoid? If let's say you're in a landlord-tenant dispute, can you get a victim status or can you enforce your rights as a tenant? Mm-hmm. Even though you may not be here legally, you have the right to certain protections?
Yeah. So that's a great point that, just because a person is undocumented, they still have the basic rights that everybody else has in regards to human rights, right? So if you've been injured on a job, you have a right to workers' compensation in the form of you could
and
file.
To sue if you are entitled to.
Right. You're not going to be able to get lost wages because you weren't supposed to be working, but you can definitely sue and maybe be covered for your health care and pain and suffering and things of that nature. So in various different situations, landlord-tenant, like you mentioned, personal injury, just because you're undocumented, you shouldn't be afraid to come forward and say that these things happen because you do have a right to bring a lawsuit as well.
And an immigrant facing those concerns should also consult with a real attorney in New York or wherever to find out what their rights are.
Absolutely.
And not rely on, whatever they hear on the street or someone who's not an attorney.
Yes, of course. So there's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately. So it's really important to rely on the advice of an attorney in any field, really.
What are some other do's and don'ts for some with their children, for their parents, for their siblings on trying to stay here or be able to come to this country legally at some point? Not
using fraudulent information, right? Just being honest, upfront and honest about what's going on. So if you filed petitions in the past and you've lied on them, it's going to impact your current attempts to get immigration relief.
And if you're using false documents, a false passport or a false driver's license or false something else, that may hurt you.
It may, yeah.
Are immigrants able to get some kind of legitimate ID cards, or from New York or from a local municipality?
Yeah, so there's the NYC ID that is available whether you're documented or not. I always encourage my clients to get that so that they have some form of ID, and also driver's license in New York. You can also get a driver's license regardless of your immigration status.
But don't lie about your name or anything in obtaining that ID.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I've actually had clients who have come to me who in the past lied about their information in order to get a driver's license, and now they want to give their real information to be able to update it and get everything corrected. And even doing that is something that you should have the help of an attorney with, because now you've committed a crime by lying in the past.
I just want to remind our listeners that we're talking with Tina Genovese. She's an immigration attorney with offices in Rockville Center. And she helps people, as you've heard, to try to legitimize their ability to stay in the United States and pursue whatever rights they can to immigration and citizenship. Tina, what information do you have on your website that's helpful about these areas of the law?
Yeah, so on my website, I have a news section that you'll be able to find, current topics that are going on. I also have an education section that will go into detail about some of these grounds that we've discussed. And then there's a resources section where people can find links that will bring them to other websites that are useful in their immigration process.
And just give us that website.
It is transparentjusticelaw.com.
And I'm just going to spell it TRANSPARENT, justicelaw.com. And you also offer a lower cost initial consultation.
Yes.
For employers or for immigrants or for family.
Yeah, so consultations are $100, and they last an hour. And if you need an interpreter, one will be provided for you.
And whenever you represent clients, you get an interpreter so that you understand them and they understand you.
Absolutely. So in my position as an asylum officer previously, I learned that interpretation is really key in being able to provide representation adequately.
And if most legal proceedings, or if someone is in a criminal situation, they have a right to an interpreter. If they don't feel comfortable with or even a civil proceeding, they have a right to an interpreter. They should ask for it so they understand clearly what's going on, and so they are understood as well.
There are interpreters provided at interviews with USCIS.
But I mean, in any kind of legal proceeding.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. So any kind of court case, a criminal matter, they should request an interpreter.
Yes, absolutely.
If they need one.
Yeah.
What final thoughts do you have or advice you'd like to give?
I'd just like the community to know that education is key. The decisions that they're making have a big impact on their life, and knowing what those decisions involve and what it's going to do is really important. And that's something that I'm passionate about, providing people with that information.
And whatever has happened to them, whatever they did or did not do, you'll try to set them on the right track so they can take advantage of these programs in the future and just have the best possible scenario.
Yes, exactly.
And your website one more time.
transparentjusticelaw.com.
And as you've heard mentioned, there's a lot of valuable information on that site. Our guest, immigration attorney Tina Genovese, has offices in Rockville Center. If you need an interpreter, she'll be glad to make sure an interpreter is available. I'd like to thank our guest. And remember, if you want to tell someone else about this program, it's available as a podcast right here on WHPC at nccradio.org, and many other law topics are available as podcasts as well. And you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. And please join us next week at the same time for another program on Law You Should Know.